In this video, we're going to be looking at some of the reasons why we pursue full employment, as well as some of the consequences for our GDP, for taxation revenue, for inequality, and for our overall living standards if we fail to achieve our goal of full employment. So when we're talking about the benefits of employment, some of the main benefits are that we are working at our productive capacity, so there's a lack of waste in terms of our use of labour resources. It allows for greater taxation receipts for the government, and as accordance with that, because there's less unemployment benefits, there's less welfare. It helps to boost non-material living standards through creating improved social self-esteem, can create increased social cohesion because people with a job are less likely to be involved in crime or breakaway gangs and things like that. It helps to boost equity because there's a smaller gap between high income earners and low income earners because less people are living off welfare. It helps to reduce the rates of crime, reduce homelessness and other problems that can impact our welfare. So in this video, we're going to look mainly at the consequences of high rates of unemployment. There are some benefits of high rates of unemployment, but they're very minor compared to a lot of the consequences. So some of the consequences that we'll be looking at in this video is the burden it puts on taxpayers because less people are paying tax, how it leads to increased inequality, how it reduces average incomes for citizens and reduces our purchasing power, how it leads to a reduction in efficiency, and reduce economic growth, and how it can have a negative impact on our non-material living standards, including the social costs of increased unemployment. So the first one is about unemployment and GDP. Higher unemployment means less output and production. So generally when there's increased unemployment, it leads to less demand, which flows on to reduced output or production. When there is an increase in employment in the economy, this has multiplier effects. And what I mean by that is if someone generates a higher income, so let's say miners are generating higher incomes because there's more employment in the mining industry, that then flows on to additional employment in other sectors because they spend their money as well. And therefore that creates more demand in retail or creates more demand for pubs or more demand for jewellery or whatever they want to spend their money on. So higher unemployment has multiplier effects in the other way and makes it really difficult for us to achieve our goal of strong rates of economic growth, the growth that we need to boost real GDP per capita. Unemployment means we are not utilising all our labour resources in the production process, which can lead to countries working well below their productive capacity. That leads to high underutilisation of labour, and it can also lead to negative impacts for our supply curve in the long term, because when people are unemployed for a long period of time, they often start to lose the skills that they'd acquired in their early years. So people that have been unemployed for many years, can sometimes lead to a reduction in skills, which hurts our aggregate supply in the long term because we're less productive. Having said that, despite the negative supply side impacts from the reduction in skills from unemployment, there can be some benefits for aggregate supply of having higher rates of unemployment. So one of the key things about high rates of unemployment is that they're generally synonymous with low job vacancy rates, which basically means there's a lack of demand for labour, which is bad because it's hard to get a job because there's not many people employing you and there's an excess supply of labour. However, despite the fact that it's mainly bad and the wages go down and people can't get access to employment, there are some benefits from high rates of unemployment. High rates of unemployment have their benefits for labour productivity. Basically, when there's really high levels of unemployment, workers are scared of losing their jobs. They need to accept lower wages and they're willing to work harder because they don't want their fear of being part of the unemployed. So the good thing of having high rates of unemployment or associated with high rates of unemployment is it can lead to lower wages and increased productivity. This helps to reduce our real unit labour costs, which helps to reduce costs of production and inflationary pressures, and can help to boost our competitiveness and real GDP. So despite the negatives from the sense of a lack of demand, from not utilising all our capacity and our being well below our productive capacity, there are benefits for growth in the sense that it keeps prices down because productivity increases and wages are kept low. In terms of taxation revenue, higher unemployment is a negative because it means a smaller pool of workers paying income tax, which creates an increased burden on the rest of the taxpayers to pay more tax to make up for the lack of people contributing tax. It can lead to less spending and less indirect taxation as well. So the government collects less taxation from income tax because less people are working, but it also flows on to things like reduced GST from a reduction in spending throughout the economy. This decrease in tax revenue makes it harder for the government to provide essential services which promote our living standards. So if you're talking about the problems in relation to the budget, talk about how there's less income tax, there's less GST and indirect taxes, and that makes it harder for the government to provide essential services like healthcare, like defence, national security, which all help to boost what we call our non-material living standards. The government will also have to spend more money on welfare, which makes it more difficult for them to provide other essential services. So it's really bad for the budget from taxation revenue point of view, from a welfare point of view, and reduces the amount of money the government's got to provide other essential services. If the government doesn't want to cut their expenditure, the problem is then that we're likely to run a budget deficit. So the government can make a choice to keep their expenditure high when there's high rates of unemployment, but the problem is that can lead to budget deficits, which can then increase government debt, which has problems in the future because we may lose our AAA credit rating because we're too much of a risk. That will lead to increased interest rates on borrowed loans. It may lead to a reduced willingness of foreign countries to lend us money altogether, which can be bad for our long-term growth. Income inequality, higher unemployment rates are really bad for income inequality and poverty as well. More people will be relying on welfare and receiving government transfer payments instead of their factor income, which is the income from a job, which will increase the gap between the lowest and highest income earners in society. So the poorest quintile, which is the bottom 20% of income earners, are likely to be earning a smaller percentage of the total income in the economy. More people are likely to be unable to afford the goods and services to achieve a dignified standard of living. So higher unemployment leads to higher poverty, a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, and less people being able to achieve what we call a dignified standard of living, which is all bad for equity. And lastly, in terms of our living standards, unemployed citizens generally earn less than half of the income of employed citizens. So the average minimum wage is around $600 to $700 a week for those working 38 hours a week. That is almost double the New Start allowance. In fact, it's actually a lot more than double, if I could count, the average amount that someone receives on New Start allowance. So it's 2.5 times the minimum wage what you would receive if you're not working. And as you can see, the per annum difference is considerably different as well. New Start allowance is inadequate to provide a dignified standard of living, and a lot of politicians believe it should be increased, and general people in society. Higher unemployment therefore leads to a reduction in material living standards and diminishes the economic prosperity and welfare of citizens. From a non-material point of view, it also reduces citizens' quality of life. They have to face the stigma associated with being unemployed and the non-financial benefits associated with having a job, including a sense of connectedness to the community, higher self-esteem/self-worth. If someone is unemployed, they are also likely to lose particular skills in the long term, which makes them more unemployable in the long term. Unemployment can also come with psychological problems associated with being distanced from society, so that can be mental health issues, depression, and other issues that can occur from not engaging with society at the level that perhaps they have in the past. In terms of the social costs, these can include increased crime rates, which affect non-material living standards, increased domestic violence, health-related problems, so again relating to mental health and depression, which all affect our non-material living standards. Increased incidence of psychological harm and general ill health due to unemployment as well. The less government also hurts our non-material living standards. So not only are people's non-material living standards worse because they're not connected to society, but the government also has less money to provide essential services to actually help people in a situation where they may be experiencing mental illness or family breakdown or crime or depression or assault or all these things that can be associated with unemployment. Thank you.